CASAT Podcast Network.
Welcome to Season 2 of CASAT Conversations. I am your host, Heather Haslam. This season, we will explore the timely and complex topic of resilience for healthcare providers. Within each conversation, you will hear from experts, clinicians, and providers who will explore and share the latest research, best practices, and applications for how to be resilient. Please enjoy today's conversation. Alaine Duncan is a licensed acupuncturist and certified somatic experiencing practitioner. She graduated from Maryland University of Integrative Health's program with a master's degree in acupuncture, and she's completed somatic experiencing practitioner training. Her research background includes serving on studies assessing the impact of integrative medicine on compassion fatigue in military caregivers, the use of acupuncture for the treatment of combat-related traumatic stress, the treatment of chronic headaches in current conflict veterans with traumatic brain injuries, and for Gulf War illness. She was a founding director of Crossing Healing and Wellness in Silver Springs, Maryland, and was a charter member of the Integrative Health and Wellness Program at the D.C. Veterans Administration Medical Center, serving as a contractor there from 2007 to 2017. She is the co-founder of Integrative Healing, with a mission to integrate the wisdom of Chinese medicine with the study of neurobiology and traumatic stress in both the classroom and the treatment room. She is adjunct faculty member at Maryland University of Integrative Health. Her book, The Tao of Trauma, is an East meets West exploration of traumatic stress. It provides basis for continuing education classes she offers for acupuncturists and mental health providers on best practices for the treatment of traumatic stress. So welcome, Alaine. We're so happy to have you on the show today.
I'm really glad to be here.
As we get started, how did you get into this work?
Well, there's sort of layers and layers of getting into this work that I can tell you about. I went to acupuncture school in 1988 and finished in 1990, so I'm now over 30 years in practice. And that was out of my personal experience with hepatitis C, where at that time Western medicine couldn't offer treatment or cure. And I sought out acupuncture and was so moved by my own experience that I wanted to give it away to other people. So that's what inspired my going to acupuncture school. And then I had been in practice, 15 years or so in 2003, and was an established practitioner in the Silver Spring, Washington, D.C. area. And I heard the parents of Lance Corporal Jeffrey Lucy on the radio. And he had come home from Fallujah, unable to live with what he had seen and what he had been asked to do, and had committed suicide in his parents' basement. And I was just so moved by these lovely, lovely parents. His dad was a nurse, his mom was a social worker, and they did everything for their son. He sat in their laps and wept, and they held him. I mean, there was nothing that they could have done. And the VA kind of dropped the ball on him. They should have held him in a locked ward and under protection. And they released him from the hospital, and he hung himself in his parents' basement. So I was kind of filled with this thought, this feeling that it didn't have to be this way. That acupuncture could have made a transformative difference both in Jeffrey and in his parents' experience, and that we needed to bring integrative medicine into these settings in order to save people's lives. Just the thought of young people unable to live with their experience was just too much for me. So I sought out additional training in understanding trauma and working with trauma, and the Somatic Experiencing Institute was glad to come to our area, and they would work with not just mental health providers, but also with body workers and acupuncturists to train them in trauma resolution. And, I kind of fell in love from the first class, that they said, well, there's these two branches of the nervous system. There's the sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch. And I thought, well, that sounds like yin and yang. I mean, I'm an acupuncturist. I understand through Chinese medicine, and here was neurobiology talking my language. So I kind of, just jumped in with both feet, and was able to feel very much at home. And I think by bringing Chinese medicine and integrating it with neurobiology, I was able to find some new ways to approach trauma survivors, new ways to access the trauma that's held in the tissues of people, that it became very clear to me early on that we can't just change our minds about what happened to us. We have to change our physiology, and how we've moved into either a brace or a collapse response in response to the circumstances that we faced, in response to how our biology helped us navigate a certain experience that was helpful and useful at the time, but as time goes on, it becomes less helpful, less useful in new circumstances.
I'm really struck by how, driving, listening to this story on the radio, just opened up this whole world for you in supporting the healing of veterans.
Yeah. I actually had that thought, and then it faded away like a lot of thoughts. And a couple months later, I heard them again on the radio. And I recognized Kevin Lucy. I recognized his dad's voice before he identified himself. And I said, oh, well, time to listen now. So we brought the Somatic Experiencing Institute to begin training clinicians in the area. And I was able to, that May, during National Nurses Week, a group of us went to the Walter Reed Army Medical Center and offered a wellness care compassion fatigue clinic for the nurses during National Nurses Week. And of course, we invited other clinicians and administrators and volunteers there too. We were not allowed to treat soldiers, inpatients, but we could treat staff. And then a year later, we came back again. Each time we were there for 3 days during National Nurses Week, 12-hour days, and treated over 1,000 people in those 3 days.
Wow.
And the second time we came, the second year, we saw some of the same people, but they looked positively gray. They looked haggard, fatigued, exhausted, brittle, you name it. And that's when we said, it's not enough to be here once a year for a few days. We need to be here every week. So we were very fortunate. We were all volunteers those first 2 times, but I didn't feel like we could ask professionals to volunteer on a weekly basis. That I wanted people who, were skilled and, competent and capable and had funds to pay for continuing education and, all of that. Mm-hmm. So we were fortunate to get some funding and able to offer a year-long clinic. We were there every Wednesday. We saw between 60 and 80 people most every week. And we had the chief of the Nursing Research Service as our principal investigator, and we're able to collect data and publish a paper and learn something about the impact of caring for the caregivers on their ability to act in a compassionate way. Our goal, kind of in alignment with the people who do the Heart Math Institute work, that's heartmath.org, was to impact the experience of being at Walter Reed. So our thesis was that if enough people left our clinic feeling more regulated, experiencing more cardiac coherence, that vibration, which extends from our heart, according to the Heart Math people, a minimum of 6 to 8 feet, that when they went to a bedside of a patient, that coherence would influence the patient. That when they were behind the nurses' station with their pals and coworkers, that their regulation would influence the regulation of their coworkers. Now, we have no way of knowing whether that's true or not, but we do know that we treated about 15% of the staff of the hospital over the course of that year, and that of those who attended 12 or more times, 77% of them said they had more compassion for their patients, as which they ascribed to attending our clinic. Wow. So, no, every nurse wants to feel more compassionate. That's the nature. That's their nature, right? Mm-hmm. And that number of percentage of people who felt more compassionate increased with the number of visits. So we can at least say that the more they came, the better they got. And there were also unsolicited comments about health habits, exercise, diet, better able to resolve conflicts at home and at work, things like that. That it was one of the more satisfying years of my now 30 plus year clinical life. It was really a wonderful experience to serve there and feel like we made a difference.
That's incredible. I think about, what you saw in the first time you went to Nurses Week, and then what you described when you went back a year later, and that impact of the fatigue, the burnout, and then how can we support our caregivers who are on the front lines on a daily basis.
That's right.
And the importance of regulation, right? Mm-hmm. And how me showing up as a provider, even if I think I'm holding it together well, and if I have a lot going on under the surface, that has an impact on my colleagues. It has an impact on my patients. So how can we support ourselves in regulation?
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting statistic that just came to me. It's within military circles, the higher rates of traumatic stress actually belong to military caregivers rather than infantry. We would think that being in battle would be a higher risk for trauma, but actually the day-to-day caring for highly wounded young people is at least as stressful, or at least results in more compromised regulation than being on the front lines of battle.
Wow. What are some of the factors that you think contribute to that?
Well, I think in battle there's a sense of cohesion. You're with your group, you're with your team, and there's nothing that a human being wants more than to feel like they're part of a tribe, part of a group that's working together. The awareness. I remember asking one vet, I would often ask, what helped you cope? This is jumping forward to when I then went to work at the Veterans Administration and worked there for 10 years. And I would often ask, what helped you cope? And they would so often say it was the other people in my unit. I knew they were taking care of their quadrant and I was taking care of mine. We could trust each other. We knew we could trust each other. And that actually the spirituality of military culture in the ability to connect with others and trust others and be, in partnership with others was just a remarkable experience for me. I think it was transforming to me. I had no experience with military culture before this, and I had my own prejudices, I confess. And what I found was a quality of human being that was, pretty special. Pretty special.
I'm struck by, as we have different conversations with researchers, there's this notion in our world about resilience and what that means.
That's right.
And oftentimes it's focused on the individual and like the stories around it, like I pulled myself up. But as we know from the research at this point, that it really is about resources and people and connection more than anything else, and that we really do need community.
Absolutely. There's a book called Tribe by a fellow named Sebastian Junger, and he did some observation of World War II era in England, and the children who were scurried off to the countryside while London was being bombed actually in adulthood fared less well than the children who were subjected to scurrying into bomb shelters but stayed with their families.
Wow.
And stayed with their neighborhood and their community as they went together into the bomb shelter and cared for each other. but the ones that were taken off to the countryside, in spite of being physically safer on a level of their morbidity and mortality related to stress response, they did worse.
Wow,
So
that's incredible.
Tribe makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm. You know, earlier you talked about it's not enough to change your mind. We have to change our physiology. Yeah. So in your practice, I'm curious if you'll share with us what that looks like as an acupuncture and Chinese medicine practitioner. Right.
So there's this concept in neurobiology called Enteroception. It's basically like body awareness, embodied awareness. And my sense when I translate that through my Chinese medicine mind is that when people experience an overwhelming sense of threat, their qi, their energy body, kind of disperses. It kind of leaves their body. In mental health terms, they call that dissociation or fragmentation. And when we ask people for their interoceptive awareness, like, what do you notice as I have my hand under your kidney and I'm giving it an opportunity to rest into my hand? Or what do you notice after I needle that point? Or if I palpate this point and that point, which one feels better? Which one should I needle? Like, I'm asking them to make their own inner assessment based on their interoception. And every time they notice their interoception, they're bringing their qi and their awareness back to their body. So we know from Chinese medicine that the functions of qi include warming, energizing, holding, transforming, transporting, all these different functions. And really all we have to do is bring qi back to the body, and then people will get well. So, for instance, I always start my sessions with, I usually start my sessions in chairs so that we're at the same level of each other. I'm not towering above them. And I'll ask, how's this distance between us? So I'm asking for their interoception of the degree of closeness that they want. Oh, well, you can come closer. And then I might come a little bit too close and watch them go, and I go, okay, I'm going to step back just a little bit. Let's find the sweet spot. Or I'll go far back. Oh, no, that's too far. So I'm working with interoception all the time. And we have our little conversation, our little update about what's going on, and then we'll move on to the table, and I'll start my conversation with, let's give yourself a minute to wiggle, shift, and adjust, and find just 1 or 2% more comfort. And then when I see them take a nice big breath, I say, oh, I see you got a nice breath there. Tell me what's happening. Well, my body feels heavier. Notice that. And I might even say, let's let your bones be heavy and your muscles be soft. So I'm asking them for body awareness, not cognitive awareness, but body awareness of their physical state. Mm-hmm. And what I found, and this was pretty fascinating to me, what I found when I was at the Veterans Administration, this was very poignant, that some people will respond to traumatic stress with a bracing in their muscles, and they'll become very tight. Their muscular is tight, they're braced, they often will look like tight, Mm-hmm. And if I was to place a needle into that tight body type, the needle will hurt, and the qi, the energy, will not move with the stimulation of my needle because the trajectory is all clamped down. Similarly, if the person responds to stress with a flaccid or a collapsed body state, I can needle and needle and needle, and there's not enough tone to carry the qi. So I had to develop some approaches that would help a person move towards regulation, like away from their braced state, or bring some tone into their collapsed state before I could needle, in order for my needle to have effectiveness. Mm-hmm. So things like bringing awareness to body sensation, some touch work like holding the kidney adrenal system, or helping them choose which side they'd like me to stand on and notice comfort with that. Like, that would help them come into just move in a direction towards regulation so that my needle could be more effective. Wow. And it was those kinds of things that over time kind of led me to codify an integrative approach to working with trauma survivors that's a kind of an East meets West. That I could study neurobiology, Western neurobiology, and polyvagal theory, and the self-protective response, mostly through the lens of the Somatic Experiencing Institute and Stephen Porges. And then I could filter that through my Chinese medicine mind and the 5 elements and Chinese physiology, and I could come up with approaches to working with people that could more, in a more focused or tailored way, access these hidden away places where we tend to store our trauma experiences. I could get access to what is so easily hidden by trauma survivors, because we all want to present as like competent, put together people. And it does help to be able to read pulses and diagnose tongues and palpate and all of that. But then there's another dimension that if I also take neurobiology in place, that I can see even more clearly how to access these places that want either to be more toned or to be less braced.
I love your approach, really, about
Thank you.
Pointing people back to their body as, they are the expert of their own body, and getting them to pay attention to how am I reacting or responding to, even just the distance or what side of the body that you're on. And then how you reflect back what you're seeing in the body as a way to increase that interoception.
That's right. And the uncanny thing is, as people release like a brace that's in their musculature, it will frequently, as it releases down a limb, an arm or a leg, it will release along a meridian. It'll release along a Chinese meridian energy pathway. So that will also give me clues about where might I want to place a needle to facilitate that release to be more complete or more helpful. It's really crazy to watch. It's just great to watch Chinese medicine come alive before your eyes, and in this work. Yeah,
that's incredible. So you wrote the book, The Tao of Trauma. Can you tell us about the key elements of the book?
Yeah, sure. So early in my somatic experiencing training, they taught us about the work of Peter Levine, who founded somatic experiencing. And he's an ethnobiologist. He went out into nature and studied predator-prey relationships. And over time, he was able to codify 5 steps that he calls the self-protective response that all animals, including 2-legged animals, human beings, primates, go through as we navigate danger and navigate life threat. Now, here's the curious thing. Those 5 steps are mirrored in the 5 elements of Chinese medicine. So Chinese sages 5,000 years ago also knew about these 5 steps. They didn't speak about them in the exact same way. But when I speak about them and integrate Dr. Levine's work with Chinese medicine, they come alive. So I'll name the 5 steps the way I've named them. The first, and I think of them as capacities for survival, capacities for life. So the first one is awaken arousal. We need to notice that there's a pothole in the street that wasn't there before, or we're going to trip and break our ankle. So we need capacity for mindfulness. And awaken arousal belongs to the metal element, which is the organs, the lung and the colon, the emotion of grief, and also inspiration. The next step is signal threat. So we need to have capacity to recognize threat, but also to recognize safety and to make that distinction. So the kidney and the adrenal gland sits right on top of the kidney, belongs to the water element, and its job is to get afraid, and to notice when we don't need to be afraid. so that we can appropriately signal threat and also discern the difference between I'm uncomfortable and I'm unsafe. Because if we make a mistake in that, we can make sometimes deadly mistakes. We can react in a way we don't need to. So signal threat is the second. The third is mobilize a response. Mobilize a response that's commensurate with the level of threat. So we need that capacity to fight and flight in order to protect ourselves, but we don't want to use a cannon when a fly swatter would be adequate. So mobilize a response belongs to the wood element. It's always on. It's also reflected in our sympathetic nervous system. So it's always on and available to protect and defend. That's the wood element in the mobilize a response. And the fourth step is called, I call it restore coherence. And it's basically the function of the heart and the fire element to come back to regulation once the threat is over. So the heart's job in the threat response is to signal arousal in the whole body. Like the kidney signals the threat, but the heart commands a response. So the heart says, okay, kingdom of the body, all hands on deck, life threat, we need to respond. So the heart commands that response. But when the threat is over, the heart returns to equanimity. It returns to a regulated, easy beat, and we know it's over. When I was at the Veterans Administration, there were hundreds of veterans, Vietnam-era veterans, who wore a ball cap with where they served across the brim. And they would sit in the coffee shop and talk with each other about their wartime experiences, as if they were yesterday. And the issue was that their heart hadn't caught up with, that's then, this is now, I wasn't safe then, I'm safe now, that's over. So someone who doesn't know that they're safe now and that the threat is over, that's kind of emblematic of needing treatment in their heart meridian. Then the last step belongs to the earth element, the spleen and the stomach. I call it digest the gristle. So what happens as we make our way through all of these 5 steps is no matter how successful we are in each of those steps, there's still going to be a little bit of gristle for us to process. That's the nature of trauma. There's hard stuff in it. So what Peter Levine says, is that if we make it through all those 5 steps successfully, we're going to be less likely to have trauma symptoms. So if we can, our job as clinicians is to sort out which step got thwarted in that cycle of 5, and how can I access what's stored in the body because it got thwarted, it got stopped up. How can I access that location and help it resolve and complete? So the wonderful thing about Chinese medicine is that they codified these resonant tissues and organs and emotions with each of those 5 elements. So, for example, when I was at the VA, a fellow, I was coming to pick up a fellow from the desk for the first visit, and I go to shake his hand, and he says, "I don't press flesh with women." And his jaw is really tight, and his body is tight, and we're strut down the hall, and everything's tight, and he's angry, and he's in pain down the side of his leg, and he shows me, and he's got a headache, and I do my diagnosis on the spot. This is a wood element type. He's stuck in his fight mobilization response, and we need to lessen his braced state so that I can get a needle in him. So we come to the door of my office, and he sees flowers on the stand, and his face starts to soften. And I said, "I think I noticed your face softening. Is that true?" And he says, "Well, yeah, I used to garden with my grandfather, so seeing the flowers reminds me." "Okay, let's bring your grandfather here. What happens?" And you can just see his body lighten. And as I saw his face soften, his body lighten, I said, "So tell me, what percentage of you feels safe right now?" And he looked at me with these amazing eyes, and he said, "Damn, no one has ever asked me to feel safe." It's not safe to feel safe when you're in battle. You need to be in constant alert. So we got up on the table. I did a very simple treatment, 2 points, 2 pairs of points on his wood pathways, his liver and his gallbladder. And when he got off the table, I asked him, I often ask people for one word for how they feel different now, because I want them to really embody a different state of being. He said, ebullient. I feel ebullient. And he put his ankle over his knee to tie his shoe and said, damn, I haven't been able to bend my knee like that since I got home from Iraq. So his tendons and ligaments had become more flexible, as well as his emotional state was more flexible. Because when we went back up to the desk to schedule another appointment, he picked me up off he's a big guy, I'm fairly small, and planted a kiss on my cheek and put me back down on the ground.
Aww.
So that, like, Chinese medicine knows that the tendons and ligaments are associated with the wood element. So although I wasn't specifically treating his tendons and ligaments, the regulation that he found in his wood element helped his tendons and ligaments be more flexible and helped him move out of that locked-in angry state into a more flexible and relational one. Mm-hmm. So when the wood went into more regulation, it then in turn fed the fire, his heart, and he was able to be in connection with me. So in Western terms, we'd say his ventral vagus nerve, which allows us to be in relationship and to solve conflicts in the context of relationship, had been tonified. That it was working better because of the capacity of he and I to find relationship with a little more regulation in his system.
That's incredible.
Great story, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, it's a wonderful story.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm, again, just struck by these doorways into the body that help with regulation or help the chi flow again. Right. And how remarkable it is, right, in this one session to see such a big shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what role does integrative medicine have in supporting a person's resilience?
Well, I think of like another name that I like to use for integrative medicine is vibrational medicine. That Western medicine is more biochemical medicine. It looks at blood values and it offers pharmaceutical interventions largely. There are physiatrists and physical therapists who also use touch techniques, but largely we could categorize Western medicine as biochemical. And Chinese medicine isn't the only vibrational medicine. Craniosacral work is vibrational, depending on how it's done. Massage can be vibrational medicine. Lots of art therapy, music therapy, etc., are meeting people at the level of vibration, of their vibration. And trauma is vibrational illness. It's an impulse that affects our tissues that stays with us. Like when, for example, when a soldier, this is a little bit old-fashioned now, but when a soldier leaves Iraq, gets to Kuwait, like their trauma response goes with them to Kuwait. Mm-hmm. It goes with them when they come back home. You don't get to check your trauma at the door of time, geography, experience. It comes with you, and it will also vibrationally impact the people who love you. Mm-hmm. So we can interject regulation anywhere into that vibrational container and make an impact. So, for example, if I treat, anytime I treat someone and they leave my office in a more regulated state, if they have a sleeping partner, that sleeping partner will lie next to a more regulated energy body for 8 hours that night, hopefully. And they will get a treatment because they're lying next to a more regulated person. So we don't have to treat everyone in the world. We just need to treat a critical mass of people so that our world can be more regulated and people will make fewer errors around recognizing when I'm safe and when I'm uncomfortable and when I'm unsafe. Mm-hmm. Because that moment of I think I'm unsafe is always the excuse that people who shoot other people use. I didn't feel safe, so I shot him. Well, maybe you need to take responsibility for your anxiety and not blow your anxiety through that other person's body. Mm-hmm. So the more that we can help people be regulated and make those distinctions of interoception, my stomach's gurgling, my stomach feels tight, I don't feel comfortable, but am I safe? Yeah, I think I'm safe, but I do recognize that I'm uncomfortable. I live in America where white supremacy and misogyny and capitalism has affected my worldview, and I need to have more mindfulness about that so that I don't act out of those really contracted negative states. I need to grow up. I need to mature. I need to digest the gristle, mm-hmm. and find a way to recognize the humanity in another person who's different than me. Maybe they dress different. Maybe they speak a different language. Maybe they're a different race or nationality or sexual preference or whatever they are. I need to transcend my knee-jerk reaction of I'm uncomfortable and translating that into unsafe, and instead say, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. I'm going to own my discomfort, but I'm not going to put it on them.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about, that distinction between I am safe and uncomfortable requires a pause, a conscious pause.
Exactly.
And I think, as human beings, we don't always like to be uncomfortable either. And so do you have any recommendations for how do I sit with the discomfort?
Yeah. Would you like another story?
Yeah.
It's a great story.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So this fellow who's a veteran got on a subway train, and the train got over full, and he started feeling anxious. Every other time he had felt this level of anxiety, he's come to out of a blackout with bloody fists. Mm. And this time he'd had a few sessions with me at the VA, few acupuncture treatments. The door opened to the train and he got off the train. So he had that moment of time to recognize, I'm anxious, I'm uncomfortable. Oh, let me get off the train. And the next train came by, it wasn't so full, he got on the train and everything was fine. So in that moment, he found that moment of time, that moment of mindfulness. I suspect that he had cultivated some capacity for mindfulness in having the few acupuncture treatments he had had. And the transit police got a treatment. The other riders in the train got a treatment. His daughter, who he was going to visit, said, Daddy, you're cool. She got a treatment. Like no one had to suffer. Mm-hmm. Because he found that gift of mindfulness, that moment of mindfulness that allowed time between stimulus and response.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm just so aware of that ability to regulate in the moment and then the ripple effects that can have.
That's right. So that's another example of vibrational medicine. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like that vibration mm-hmm. traveled all over.
Because someone walks into the room who is angry or frustrated, people feel that. And
that's right.
It has an impact on the room when someone is, anxious or actively engaged in some way.
So let's look at that, because there's an interesting phenomenon in terms of workplaces that and proximity to other people, that a regulated nervous system actually speaks louder and more commanding than a dysregulated one. So if there's this this angry, dysregulated, rigid person walks into the queue, and everyone around them is more regulated and able to say, "Hey, pal, can I help? What's happening? We're here for you." Instead of going clumped up and retreating to the corner and leaving them alone and all that kind of stuff, that the nature of the workplace can actually transform.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
Especially as we, talk about healthcare providers and behavioral health professionals and the importance of how can I show up in a regulated state As we were talking, you were talking about the 5 steps and really looking at threat and safety and these places that we get stuck in that 5 steps. I'm curious, you talked about the nurses and what you saw there, and we know that the healthcare system is a very stressful place to work. And I think there's many clinicians who may be living in that chronic stress cycle. So what is some advice that you have for a clinician who may feel stuck?
Right. Well, self-care is really critical. And I think having a practice of ensuring good sleep, ensuring good food. You know, sometimes when we feel hyper-stressed, we feel more interested in eating, sugar and junk food. But the more that we can eat a good, healthy diet, the more regulated our body is going to be. Taking time in nature. And, different ones of us, based on those 5 elements, are going to find different aspects of nature to be helpful. Like if we're struggling in our metal element, in our awakened arousal place, going and walking on mountains or staring at mountains and breathing clean air will help regulate that, because the lung is the organ associated. If we're challenged in the signal threat and the water element, go walk along a stream or go for a swim. If we're a wood type and that mobilization response, we're just quick to mobilize, or we find we can't mobilize, we can't protect and defend, go climb a tree or go hug a tree or go hold a wooden block in your pocket, And if we're a fire type, spend time in the sun. Go dancing with another person. And if we're an earth type, find comfort, find caring, find comfort. And I think for all of the types, the critical thing is cultivating the ventral vagus nerve, which is the fire element in Chinese medicine. It's what responds to that sense of threat with a capacity to resolve the threat through relationship. So things that cultivate the ventral vagus are go dancing, play ball with your kids or anybody. Go down to the park and shoot some baskets. Get involved in a choir or a singing group where you're exchanging a vibration with other people. Do line dancing where you're coordinating with other people. At work, if people took 2 minutes and went back to back with each other and created a vibrational hum that went down into their guts and experienced that with another person, they would find themselves more regulated. It would take 2 minutes. Like every staff meeting could start with humming together. And the shift would be different. We need to create these regulating vibrations Western medicine calls it ventral vagus. Chinese medicine calls it the heart. And in Chinese medicine, the heart is known as the supreme controller. Its job is to beat out a regular rhythm that informs every other organ of the body about how to be more regulated and coherent with everybody else, with all the other organs of the body. So giving ourselves opportunities, even taking a moment to look in someone else's eyes and have them receive your eyes and you give them your eyes. You're creating a connection in the heart that will help regulate the whole kingdom of the body.
I used to run chronic disease self-management workshops, and we did this brainstorming session with the participants of the workshop. And it was things, I don't remember the exact brainstorming question, but it was like basically things that bother me about my healthcare provider. And one of the number one things that I heard in every group that I facilitated was they don't look at me in the eyes. Yeah.
They're looking at their computer as if you are your blood values instead of you are a person.
Yeah. And so just that shift to taking the, minute or the moment to really look deeply in someone's eyes, and how that can regulate myself as a practitioner and help to co-regulate my patient is fascinating.
And increasingly, they also don't touch us. They rely on blood values rather than palpation. And we long to be touched. Physical touch that's safe physical touch that has an element of caring in it is profoundly healing. And, Western medicine has largely made it very medicinal, very clinical, and less compassionate. And, we could do well to touch each other in safe and compassionate ways.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great example. I just read about this. When you invite someone over for dinner, when they arrived, if you spent 30 seconds, now 30 seconds can be a long time, hugging them, like take 3 breaths and hug them, that you'll move regulation into from their ventral vagus into their viscera, into their guts, in a way that will help them digest their food better and engage in more thoughtful and meaningful conversation over dinner.
I love that.
Isn't that great?
It's so great. I've read the same thing. And so I've tried this with my husband, at the end of the day. And you can really feel the body. And I tried it for 20 seconds. But you can feel the body relax. And self and other. And so it's fascinating to pause and pay attention to that.
Right. And when couples do that as a practice, they can actually help each other repair attachment wounds that go back to childhood, go back to infancy. That time to, as soon as we get home, to take time to hold each other. And until we sink into that relaxed state with each other, it can repair those old bracer collapse states left from not getting the quite best attachment experiences as infants.
That's incredible. Yeah. And it is a long time, is what I learned. It's much longer than we generally hug people. And so I was surprised.
It's not just a peck on the cheek and move on. It's,
He's like, "What are you doing?" Nothing. I didn't even tell him what I was doing. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this episode. Strange. Great. So, Alaine, as we wrap up here, how can people who are listening learn more about your work?
Yeah, thanks. I have a website. It's called integrativehealingworks.net. I'm starting a new cohort this fall for a year-long course based on my book, The Tao of Trauma. It meets 5 times, once in every season of the year, once for every step of the self-protective response. And we explore touch skills. We actually explore relationship, observation, and touch skills in each of the 5 elements in their season. And it's available for not just for acupuncturists, but also for mental health providers and body workers. And we're going to have a cohort in Ojai, California, and another cohort in Silver Spring, Maryland, and a 3rd cohort online. This past year, we learned a lot about how to be flexible and how to work with people virtually through the screen. So that online course will be a lot about virtual touch and virtual engagement. But you can register for my monthly newsletter, which I call News and Views on Integrative Healing, or register for that class or explore information about that class at integrativehealingworks.net. And I also have a Facebook page by that same name, and you can look me up there too.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm very curious about virtual touch and how that works.
Yeah, it's pretty magical. It's pretty magical.
That's so cool.
The power of intention and attention to move the energy body is profound.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's a delight to talk with you.
Yeah, it's great to talk with you as well. Take good care. Be safe.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to CASAT Conversations, your resource for exploring behavioral health topics. We hope you found today's conversation timely and meaningful. Please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. If you want to learn more, visit us at our blog at CASATOnDemand.org.
CASAT Podcast Network. This podcast has been brought to you by the CASAT Podcast Network, located within the Center for the Application of Substance Abuse Technologies at the University of Nevada, Reno. For more podcasts, information, and resources, visit CASAT.org.